Hearts of Iron 4 is a World War II grand strategy game that seeks to replicate the history of that conflict, both in the political nuances of the time, but also the technological, and seeks to simulate it, giving the player options to impact what could, did, or should have happened, depending on your perspective. Despite this being rooted in a historical conflict with lots of historiosity in the game, there are quite a few things in Hearts of Iron that just are wrong when it comes to the history. If you were to play a new game as the Soviet Union and you went to look up the technology for the time and you go to your special forces, you will see that they have unlocked and researched paratroopers. This makes sense because as early as the 1930s, the Soviets were developing paratroopers. In fact, they went very public with their development of paratroopers, and someone watching the paratroops at the time was one Hermann Goering. Now, Hermann Goering was very impressed by this, said, hey, this is the future of warfare, and he commissioned the German army to begin development of the Fallschirmjäger, or however you pronounce it. I'm not German. Now, when did the Fallschirmjäger first go into effect? 1935. Going back to our game then, let's go tab over to Germany. And you will see there are no paratroopers, despite them being researched in 1935. Okay. Now, the new German focus tree with Götterdämmerung did add a new focus for the Fallschirmjäger. And that is you get a couple research buffs and then special forces buffs. But this assumes that the Germans didn't have this beforehand. And I think I have a theory why they don't have the research unlocked. Let's tab over, just for one more example, over to our boys, Uncle Sam. Now, when you look at Uncle Sam's technology, which in this game, they have absurd amount of research slots and absurd research speed. When we go look at them, say you wanted to build a strategic bomber. Apparently, the U.S. had not researched strategic bombers by January 1st, 1936. Yet, as we will see, the U.S. had basically finished the research that they wanted to do of the B-17 bomber by the end of 1935, and in fact started production of strategic bombers early 1936. So if we were going to be, I guess, fair and accurate on this one, this should be a research slot that's probably about 95% done here. So that leads to the question, why would Paradox not put these technologies in the game, even if they are historically there? And I think, as we'll see with some of my other complaints about the historicity of the game, the main reason is likely balance. You know, this is a game. These countries were researching pretty much everything all the time. They may have had more focuses on one thing to research, but it's not like they had research slots and we can only research one thing at a time. You'll also know, if you've ever played an American game, you can pretty much have everything researched the same year it comes out on these little timelines here. So taking away some technologies from the Americans, delaying some technologies for the Germans, this is likely needed for the sake of balance. One of the older focus trees that was reworked in La Resistance was that of France. Now, if you play a game and leave historical focuses on, the French are going to take the left democratic path, because that's basically what they did historically. Except for they didn't. You'll notice on the democratic sides, there's the left and right. The left you can go communist, the right you can go fascist if you want, or even monarchist. But if you look, there are some that you can do regardless what side you pick. review foreign policy, Blum Violet. These are mutually inclusive to either side. But there are also some that are mutually exclusive. If you do revive the national bloc, you cannot reform labor laws, nationalize the industry this side. If you do form the Popular Front, you can't go down here. But there's one interesting focus that is on the mutually exclusive side that should be mutually inclusive. Ban communism. The AI, if they do form the Popular Front, and then they go down to reform labor laws, and they go down this tree like they did historically, you'll notice I can't ban communism anymore. Okay, what's the big deal? Why should you care if you can't ban communism? Well, after Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, when the Soviets and the Germans agreed to carve up Eastern Europe, the Allied powers essentially took that as them on the same side in one faction. In fact, the Allies had plans to bomb the oil fields in the Caucasus region in the Soviet Union, which, this is a side tangent, but in the new Götterdämmerung update, you can do raiding missions, but you can only raid people you're at war with, where historically in World War II, the Allies were this close to bombing the Baku oil fields in 1940 because they knew that the Germans were getting their oil from there, even though they weren't formally at war with the Soviet Union. Can't do that in game. But that's a historical quip that is not very important. But going back to the French left democratic side, like I said, you can't ban communism. However, historically, they were banned. The Communist Party was banned because of Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They arrested communist politicians, elected officials, in France. Okay, I'm about to get into timeline stuff, but one little neat thing I've noticed, if you do a game and start it in 1939, which literally nobody ever does, the Italians have fully capitulated the Ethiopians and formed Italian East Africa. Okay, World War II has just kicked off. It is 1939. After Germany declares war on Poland, they have two focuses they go to. They have around Maginot and this focus. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. The invasion of Norway and Denmark. Before Götterdämmerung, it's very common to watch a historical game and France capitulates before 1940, which historically the Germans didn't invade the Benelux region in Norway until like April, May-ish of 1940. Now, I'm still in 1939, and the Germans have declared war on Norway and are invading. So they're still early on this one here. Remember, there's a thing called the phony war because basically both sides were staring at each other, not doing too much. And here we are. They've cleared January instead of like May. So a little bit early on that one. But this timing is at least right, because it was near simultaneous German landfalls in Norway and going around the Benelux region. I will say one thing, though. Paratroopers were immensely important for the invasion of Norway. And where even is the German paratroop unit? Over here in Memel, apparently. Okay, and here we are, March 1940. We're a little bit ahead of time. This playthrough, apparently Germany struggling in Norway. But a little bit better from the last update, but still much too early. Okay, one thing I will say I am glad they fixed in the latest update of this game is, if you look, Egypt gets pretty dang close to Cairo. Now, in previous games, they would just get obliterated. They'd be out of North Africa by like early, basically as soon as they joined the war, the game would simulate. But Remember, Rommel was doing amazing, and they did push. I want to say they made it all the way to El Alamein. So this is one where they have improved the historiosity of the game. I don't know if it was the buffing of Germany makes them better in the desert, or they just tweak some AI. I think it has something to do with the British now keeping more troops on their shores so they don't get as easily naval invaded, so they're a little bit weaker down here. But these battles tend to last a little bit longer. We're entering 1941, and this is where the timeline gets really screwy. In this playthrough, apparently the Italians have fully beaten out the Greeks, basically before 1941. Since Götterdämmerung's come out, I've noticed there's a lot of inconsistency as to when the Germans break Molotov-Ribbentrop. I don't really know what the logic is, the AI's logic of when to push. I don't know if it just bases it on perceived threat based off the intelligence, like, oh, they're getting too big, we need to push now. Which, historically, that was the major reason why the Germans opened up a two-front war, was they felt that eventually Moscow was going to try to push communism to take over the world, which, to be fair, I mean, people like Trotsky were saying that. So they said, you know, the Stalin just had his purges, they're weak, we have to push now in 41 because by 42 they'll be too strong and we can't beat them. Similarly, that was the logic in World War One. And there we go. April of 1941. In most of my playthroughs, they're pushing the Soviet Union a lot earlier than before. Part of me wonders if that's due to the MIFO bills, to where their consumer goods are ridiculously high. Let's see, what does it say? Economy of conquest. Yeah. So they're up to 89% consumer goods. So I wonder if that's part of the reason why they do it. Also, the Lapland War always happens way too early. Oh, apparently, if you do a 1939 playthrough. So here's another one. If Japan, there's another one that drives me nuts historically. If Japan conquers all of China, and what they do in a lot of situations, they would never push south. They were more concerned with the Russians. They would go north to get all these natural resources up here. The reason why the Japanese invaded the Dutch East Indies, British Malaya, and the Philippines was because of a lack of resources to finish off the job in China. When the U.S. and the Allied powers sanctioned the Japanese economy, they couldn't get the oil and rubber they needed to finish the job out here. Now, in this game, I never see the AI putting sanctions against. I don't see any sanctions here. That is the reason why they pushed down south. For no other reason than that, was to get those natural resources to continue the war. Okay, so Japan just declared war against the Philippines. The game has it here as October 27th occurring.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It is literally not December 7th, 1941 when this happens. In fact, it doesn't look as bad. Okay, October, that's forgivable. But if you play with a 1936 start date as like just any old nation, sometimes it's as early as like June or July that they're invading the Philippines. It wouldn't be as big of a deal if he doesn't literally say, yesterday, December 7th. I will conclude with this. The question is why? You know, why, like some of the more egregious ones, why don't they follow the timeline? My guess is it has to do with balance. Looking at Germany, them going around the Maginot, usually in a game, most games I play, it's like 6 months early that they go. Why do they do that so early? I think it's because the AI, when they're having to fight the British and the French at the same time, if you've ever played a German game, you know that their air force is pretty strong when they have that collective grouping. So maybe the AI pushes to get France out of the way because their air force is getting shredded to bits. I don't know. I think with Japan invading way too early, It's probably due to balance. I had one friend tell me playing as the U.S. is like playing the game on sandbox mode. And you can really see that they have 300 factories right off the bat, compared to, at this point, Japan's. And granted, a lot of those are civilian factories, compared to Japan's 170. And that's within this playthrough, Japan controlling all of China. So I think they have to do it for balance, because if you were to wait until December to go to war with the U.S. as Japan, I mean, by this time, October in this game, the U.S. has already done the giant awakes. They're already on partial mobilization. Their economy, like, look at this production line. Like, I mean, it's not great, but it's pretty strong and is only going to explode further from there. Once the U.S. gets to partial mob, it's over. They get way too powerful. And so I think the developers probably, if they tried to time it to where it's December, I think Japan just gets beaten way too quickly and way too easily every game.